All right, so we're going to talk about Power BI and SharePoint today, so using the two together. Most people, when they start using Power BI, they start with using Excel. And they connect to Excel and they're like, okay, great. And then they go to schedule a refresh on it and they find that process to be more difficult than they expected. So that's where SharePoint comes in, but there's also lots of other ways to use Power BI with SharePoint. So Greg already introduced me, but I'm going to say a couple words about myself. My name is Christine Payton. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Data Platform. I have a YouTube channel. If you search my name on YouTube, it'll come up. And I also have a course on Udemy about Power BI design. So if you search on Udemy for Power BI design, it should pop up. It'll be one of the top results. So why would you ever want to use Power BI with SharePoint? Um, SharePoint can situationally make a good source. So it's not always the best source, but when you want people to be able to control things and enter data themselves and you want something that's lightweight, it's a pretty good choice. The DIY aspect of it is something that can be a pro or a con depending on who you are. So if you're the person trying to DIY, it's great. If you're an IT department and you're trying to kind of keep a lid on the crazy things that people build because you know you're going to inherit them later, then sometimes you might hate SharePoint. It just happens. But SharePoint is pretty cool because it has a version history built into it. So you can see exactly what the state of an item, a document, or any of those things were at any given point in time by checking the version history. It'll also tell you what was changed and who changed it. And you also have more of a fine-grained permission control than you get with, say, Excel. So in SharePoint, you can you have different permission levels. You can set it to contribute or edit, and those are two different permission levels on, say, a SharePoint list. So contribute lets people enter data. Edit lets them edit the actual column settings, delete columns, add columns, change column settings, that kind of thing. So there's two different thresholds. If you're worried about people breaking stuff, you can just give people contribute access to a list and they won't be able to break anything. You also have person data in SharePoint. We're going to go through this with a live example in a few minutes, but I want to kind of give you an overview of the features of SharePoint as a source. So in SharePoint, you have a column type on your lists and libraries that is a person type. And that person column has metadata attached to it. So it's attached to the user's profile in Microsoft 365. So you can expand that to get things like their department, their job title, their manager, that kind of information. So that's useful when you have, say, a form using a SharePoint list. You can pull who submitted it and their department automatically. You can also schedule a refresh on SharePoint sources without a data gateway, as long as it's SharePoint Online, not SharePoint On-Prem. And that works for Excel files too. So if you have an Excel file that you want to schedule a refresh on as a source for Power BI, you can put it in SharePoint, schedule a refresh on it there, and it works pretty well, assuming people don't modify the file too much in specific ways we'll get to later. It's also great if you don't have a robust data engineering team, or you're not a data engineer, or you don't want to learn data engineering. When do you not use SharePoint? So if you have a lot of data, meaning millions of rows of data, you probably shouldn't use SharePoint. If you have a CRM that is halfway decent, like say Dynamics, something like that, you should probably use that instead of SharePoint. But here are all the ways that we can use Power BI with SharePoint. So we have Microsoft Lists, also called SharePoint Lists. They're literally the same thing, just two different UIs. We can use a SharePoint folder source in Power BI. So that lets us combine multiple files that have the same data structure, so usually CSVs, into one table. We also have files in SharePoint. So if you connect to a single file, you can pull a single table in from an Excel sheet. We have OData. So OData is information about files. So you'll typically see this with legal teams that are, say, managing a bunch of different contracts. You have a bunch of metadata columns on those files that are helping organize them, and you can report on that. So you can get a count of contracts by type and, vendor and whatever, that kind of thing. There's embeds in SharePoint. So you can embed a Power BI report on a SharePoint page. So if you're using SharePoint as your intranet and you want to, say, embed something like a goal progress dashboard, you can do that. And we're going to go through that later too. We also have some integrations with Fabric, which I'm not going to cover a whole lot on today, but you can sync data both to and from SharePoint to Fabric and vice versa. And you also have versioning in SharePoint, like I mentioned earlier. That also works on PBIX files. So if you store your PBIX files in SharePoint, you're going to get a version history for those PBIX files. So if you're not somebody that wants to venture into Git to version control things, you can just plop it in SharePoint and call it a day.
Wait, are you saying SharePoint will be my DevOps solution?
If you don't want to use Git, it can be better than nothing. We'll say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you can sync the things to your desktop too with OneDrive. So you can sync the document library and it just behaves like it's a folder on your desktop, but it actually is living in SharePoint. It's creating a version every time you close the file.
That's my favorite trick to teach people is how to
Yeah.
sync and unsync, have it in your file explorer. And for those that don't want to like check in and check out with GitHub, makes things so much easier,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, if you're not like, a huge team working on a bunch of things simultaneously, then it's fine. So what are some problems when you're using Power BI with SharePoint? So because SharePoint is kind of a DIY solution, you can change things. So you can change file names, you can change column names, and those kinds of things will break your data refresh. So Power BI will go looking for the things by name. It can't find them because you've renamed it, and the refresh will fail. You can fix that just by updating the name in your query settings, but it does happen. So it's something that you want to plan for when you are designing things up front. It also doesn't handle file moves very well, so it's looking for files by path. So if you move things, it gets very confused. But list sources generally are more stable than trying to use Excel as a source, mostly just because they actually have field types. So you have date fields. You can only put dates into date fields. You can't put text into date fields. That's not something that people typically set up in Excel. Like you can do data validation in Excel, but most people don't bother. You also run into less issues with renames with SharePoint lists versus Excel. All right, time for the demos. So we're going to start with an Excel file here. So I have a table of data in Excel. The one thing that I would say helps the most as far as things not breaking that's really simple is to insert a table around your data and connect to the table instead of the entire sheet. So what this does is that it looks for the table by the name of the table. That means if you insert rows above the table with text in them, or you put text in or around your table, it's not going to break your query steps in Power BI. So to do that, all you do is just select your cells and go to Insert, Table. My table has headers. So now we have a table. We can connect to this inside of Power BI. It'll have an option for that when we're doing the selection process. I'll show you that in a second. But some other things we can do here. So like I mentioned, you do have data validation in Excel. So I think it's under, I usually just, oh my gosh. I need to move this presenter bar. It's on top of all my menus. One sec. There we go. All right. So if you use the search in here, you've got validation options. So you can set this to say only select, only allow dates in the date fields, that kind of thing. Preventing people from putting bad data into your typed columns is usually better than trying to fix it later. So any kind of data validation you can put on Excel files is a good thing. Another option is you can lock certain cells that you don't want people to edit. So for example, these column titles, if I don't want people to be editing those because Power BI references column titles by name, if you go to right-click these, format cells, there is a locked option under protection here. You can check that. And I think you also have to go to turn on under the review tab here, protect sheet. And then you choose which things you want people to be able to do or not do. So you want them to be able to select the cells, obviously. And then if you want to, you can turn off the deletion, but I would leave that on. There's this checkbox here for sort. So I don't usually lock cells when I use Excel. I want to point out that it exists, but it's kind of buggy. So this sort option, you would expect that if you uncheck this, that people will be able to still sort these table columns. But in practice, it doesn't actually let you sort. It'll give you an error. So we can do that. And then these fields are protected. So people won't be able to edit it. I believe, yep, there we go. So that'll help people from breaking your refresh on Power BI side. Okay, so let's save our file. I'm actually going to unprotect this so that we can edit it later. And then in Power BI, so I'm going to connect to it locally and then move it to SharePoint so that you can see the process for how to do that. I can make sure I have it here. So we're going to go to Get Data, Excel Workbook, and there was a button for it there that I totally missed. So we want Power BI. So we're going to connect to that budget file. You can see we have an option to connect to the table instead of the sheet. So we're going to select that. And we can go to transform data or we can load it, but you can see that everything's here. And then we can close and apply. I'm just going to make a super simple visual here and then save it so that we can embed it. So we'll just go
Just
with
a heads up, Christine, for some reason, like the drop downs aren't showing. I don't know if is anybody else able to see the drop downs. But just a heads up, the fact that you're like verbally going through it is awesome. So
I don't know why, because I'm sharing my entire screen and not an application, so I'm not sure what the deal with that is.
Right, all good.
Let me know if you can't see anything that's like actually important.
Okay, totally.
So I'm going to drop in just the amount by department here so that we have a visual, and then I'm going to save this. Save file. Let's see, where do I want to put this? Wow. Browse this device. I love the ability to easily select places on your computer to save in Power BI. I'm just gonna put this on my desktop and then we're gonna publish it. So if I wanted to schedule a refresh on this, since the Excel source still lives on my desktop, scheduling refresh is kind of problematic because it can't connect directly to my desktop without a gateway. So to avoid that, we can just put that file source in SharePoint. So I have a SharePoint site here. I'm going to open up my document library and we're just going to drag and drop that file into this library. All right, so this file has a specific path. If we change the path that Power BI is looking at for the file from local to SharePoint, we'll be able to schedule a refresh on it. So that is, if I go to this ellipses menu next to the file, and then go to details, and then scroll down to the bottom here. So there's this little icon for path. And this is the one you want. If you open up the file and try and copy the path from the address bar, that link won't work because it's part of the Excel Online service. It's a different link. So you want the path specifically. So I'm going to copy that. And then if I come back here, go to our query editor. So if I go to the advanced editor here, you can see that it's looking for the source on my C drive. If I go to the source step in the applied steps over here, and click the gear icon next to it, I can just overwrite this path with the path in SharePoint and click OK. And it's going to ask me to connect. So the type of authentication you select here matters. Don't do anonymous. It defaults to that, but you want organizational account. I'm going to sign in. Then come back here. There we go. So now it's looking at SharePoint instead. So we're going to republish this. All right. So in my workspace, I sort this. Go. All right, so here's our data model and our report. So I can schedule a refresh on this right here. So it says that we have invalid credentials. That's totally normal behavior the first time you publish something that uses a SharePoint source. So it wants you to put in credentials, basically. So you just click on this edit credentials here, and you change the authentication method again from anonymous to OAuth2 is the one that you want here. And set your privacy level. So this is usually going to be organizational. It doesn't actually affect anything. Power BI just won't let you connect different privacy level data sources in the same file. So go with whatever is actually accurate and then sign in. All right, so now we should be able to schedule a refresh on this. So turn it on, click apply. It's now back in our workspace. Should be able to refresh this. Yep. So it's going and it refreshed. So that's how to do the scheduled refresh on the SharePoint sources. If I come back here, I'm going to show you where the version history is. So this file, if I wanted to see the version history for this, it's just in the ellipses menu here. And then under version history, you can see the versions. So if there were more than one version, there would be, numbered rows here. And you can actually click in to look at these just by clicking the date and time next to them. So you can see what it looked like at that particular point in time. And then if you want to restore it, it's in the same menu. So you can click the menu, click restore, and it'll restore that version as a new version. So you don't ever lose anything by restoring something. It just creates a new version in the version history. And that sync button that we were talking about earlier is right here. So if you click this, it'll sync it to your local computer, and then you can access it from the File Explorer. Looks like, do I have it synced? I do. So mine, nope, that is very funky size. So mine is down here. So it'll show up as a little folder with your tenant name, and then each site is going to be its own folder here.
That's what I love. Just right there in the File Explorer, so easy.
Yeah, yeah.
Quick question for you, Christine. Do you ever do check-in, check-out of your like Power BI assets? Typically, I tell people to use like check-in, check-out, like when you're like Excel file versus, hey, are you going to collaborate versus Excel online, or you're like in the Excel app? But I don't know if that has the same. I don't know if that's best
Yeah,
practice or something people do.
you can. If you don't want other people to edit it, then you check it out and then you check it back in when you're done. But if you want to do like, multiple people editing at the same time, then don't check it out because it locks it for other people when you check it out. The
Right.
main problem I run into is people forget to check it back in. And so then you're like hounding people to check their file back in. And it's just, so if you can trust people to remember to check it back in, then sure.
Yeah, I guess I was just unsure whether like PBX files had that check in, check out, but if you're saying it does, then awesome.
Yeah, all files do. It's kind of awkward to do it from the Windows Explorer. Like you kind of have to do it from SharePoint to check it out and check it back in.
Right.
But it functions. If you want to make sure that other people aren't editing at the same time as you, then sure, check out is a good idea. All right. So next we're going to talk about the SharePoint folder source. So SharePoint folder, I go back here. So we're going to get data and then go to more. And here we have a couple options. We have folder and SharePoint folder. So folder is local computer, SharePoint folder is SharePoint. I don't know why they didn't call this SharePoint Online folder, because with the list source, it says SharePoint Online list, but this one just says SharePoint folder. So this isn't on-prem specific, but we connect to that, and it wants a site URL. So that, if I come back here, is going to be whatever is right after the word sites in the address bar. So for us, that's this part right here. So just this part, don't take anything after that, and just the word after sites to the beginning of the URL. Paste that in, click OK, and authenticate again. So you want Microsoft account. All right, so what we want to do here is not just load everything, because it tries to pull every single file in that SharePoint site into one table, and obviously that's not going to work because we have a bunch of different file types in here. So you go to transform data first to filter down to what you want to actually combine. So I usually recommend that people filter on both the extension and the path. So a specific folder and then a specific file type. That'll prevent you from pulling in things that you don't want. It's also, in my opinion, a good idea when you're using this particular source to have a dedicated site that is for SharePoint folder sources. Just because this particular connector, what it does is it lists every single file in the site first, and then it filters down to what you wanted. And so you can have performance issues when you're trying to use a site that has, 30,000 files in it. It has to churn through those to try and narrow it down to the ones you want. So having it in a smaller site is better. So we can filter on the extension here. I'm just going to take the CSVs. CSV is typically what you use this for, just because it's usually files that are generated by some system because they all have the same structure. That is the requirement of this connector, is that the files have the same columns with the same column names that it's going to combine. And then for the path, it's over here. So I only have one path in here right now because I filtered the file size down already. But if I just click that, is it actually? Oh, it didn't. So let me just do this one first and then do the file type. So we want this one. That was the folder source, and then those are all CSVs. I'm just going to text filter equals .csv. So what this does is it prevents it from pulling in random stuff, like somebody randomly uploads some file to this folder. I don't want it to pull that in, so I filter on both of those. And then we can expand. So this double down arrow next to the content is what expands those CSVs. So what this does is it looks at one file first to get the structure, and then it uses that format to expand all the rest of the files. Looks like it's got a weird overlap issue with text. I have my resolution set to extra zoomed in, so everything is a little bit wonky. All right, so here's my data. So it creates this folder of helper queries. You can just collapse this, don't delete it. It needs this in order to run the refresh, but the rest of this is all combined. So you can see it took all of those files and plunked all the data into one table. And it's got the file name here, so you can kind of troubleshoot if you end up needing that for anything. I'm not going to load this because my CSVs are kind of gigantic, and when I did this, it took like 5 minutes for it to actually load. So we're not going to do that. But let's move on to lists. So SharePoint lists back here. So lists are kind of like a table that you can somewhat control the structure of. So you can use these for forms. There's two places to get to it. So you can either go to the waffle menu and then click on lists here, or in your SharePoint site, you can just go to site contents and then create a new list right here. So this will create the same thing in both places. The UI is just slightly different between the two. So I'm going to make a new form. And we're going to call this is not Microsoft Forms, by the way. They kind of have named multiple different things similarly, and it gets really confusing. So I'm going to make a project request form. So this is the new form and list experience. This came out, I think, earlier this year or end of last year. You can add a logo if you want to. It starts with one field, which is title. So we can rename this to project title. And you can add a description if you want. That'll show up in the form. But let's add the rest of our fields here. So I'm going to do a description. So that's going to be a multi-line of text. The difference between single and multi-line of text is single line of text will cap out at 255 characters. Business case. Make these required if you want to. And let's see, we want cost. We want currency. And I'm going to add a status field. So the status field is going to be choice. And these things are really great to use with Power Automate approvals. So you can have your Power Automate flow automatically set this field based on what's approved or rejected by the flow process. But what I like to do is to hide these fields because you don't want the person that's submitting the form to be able to set the approval status, obviously. So let's add that. And then you can uncheck the box over here to hide it. So that'll remove it from the form, but it still exists in the list. So we can still see it in the list view. And then to finalize this, the send form button here has a link. So this link is a special link. It'll make it so that anybody with a link can submit the form. It doesn't give them access to the list, so you don't have to worry about that, which is kind of nice because that was kind of the problem with these lists in the past was the access is a bit tricky to control if you're not super familiar with SharePoint. So use this link specifically when you send this to people that you want to fill this out. You can preview it if you want to. Looks good. All right. So here's our list. So when somebody submits this, I can. So here's what the form looks like on the SharePoint side if you want to use the fancy link for it I copied earlier. And submit it, and you get a thank you page, and it doesn't land you on the list, which is normal. So I'm just going to close that, come back here. If I refresh this, there it is. Okay. And then our approval status, what I like to do is edit the column settings here and have it default to pending status. That way that new things that are submitted will automatically be in that status. I'm just going to set this one. All right. So here's our item. We can connect to this list with Power BI. So back here, if we go to new source, more, SharePoint online list is the one that we want. So this works kind of similarly to the folder source where it wants the site URL. So we're going to copy that again. That was this part here. Paste it in. So the implementation is the connector version. So 2.0 is way, way faster than 1.0. So use 2.0 unless you need something from 1.0. I'll show you the difference between the two in a second. Basically, 1.0 has expanded person data. So if you need the job title and department, you want 1.0 for right now. So I'm going to do this one. And then we select our list. That was project requests. Click OK. There you can see our item. So here's the person column. So created by, that was automatically set as whoever submitted the form. You can expand this out. So this double arrows here says expand to new rows, which normally you'd be scared that this would cause row duplication, but you can only have one user who created something. It's a single value field. So you can click this expand to new rows. It's not actually going to make any new rows. and then expand this again. So we can take their, so title is actually their name. It's not their job title or anything like that. And it's also got their email and their picture in here. Not that you want the picture. The picture, by the way, is kind of a funny thing in SharePoint. If you try and display profile pictures, for example, you can technically do it, but Power BI Desktop doesn't display them. So it'll look like it's not working, but when you publish it, they show up. Just FYI tangent. So you can see created by, there's my name, there's my email address. So that's the person type field, and you can see that all of the other fields are typed correctly here. So we've got this one as a dollar amount, currency, so on and so forth. Here's what we have to work with. It automatically logs the created date, modified date, so on and so forth. So you can schedule a refresh on these list sources exactly the same as the Excel source in SharePoint method. So that was using OAuth 2 when you're scheduling refresh. I'm not going to go through it because it's exactly the same. But essentially, what I like to do as far as like when to use SharePoint lists, if people want to use Excel and they're not married to Excel, I try and convince them to use a SharePoint list instead. It basically serves the same function. You can do like calculated columns and things like that. But it's a lot more structured. It makes a better source for Power BI than an Excel file. But there's some people like, finance people. I usually don't try and push too hard on SharePoint lists just because they really like Excel and that, like, that's okay. Like, deal with it. So SharePoint lists are funny. So there's this kind of, I don't want to call it like what do you call it? So people think that you can only hold 5,000 items in SharePoint lists, and that's actually not true. That's the list view threshold. So that's how many items the view can display at one time. It can actually hold hundreds of thousands of items without too much difficulty. You just kind of start running into UI issues in SharePoint when you have more than 5,000 items. Power BI can pull way more than that from a SharePoint list without issue. And the performance isn't terrible as long as you don't have a lot of complex fields. Like if you have 10 person fields on your list, it's not going to work very well, but number and text fields are fine.
What's the largest list you've worked with, like in like a real setting?
Yeah, I've done up to like 100,000 just to test, and it was fine. I hear Brent had a Power App that had like 200,000 rows on it as a SharePoint source, and it was okay. I
Brent's a
wouldn't really
wild
go
man.
higher than that. Yeah,
He goes wild.
yeah. But really, if you have something better than SharePoint, like if you have Dataverse, like that is better for large numbers of rows. Honestly, it's usually a cost issue though, because that'll trigger premium licensing.
Right.
All right.
Exactly.
So OData is the last one that I wanted to talk about. So OData is what has the file metadata attached to it. So if you're, my example is a legal department, I want to get the legal file metadata. So the OData feed is at a particular URL in SharePoint. So I'm going to paste this in. Maybe you can put this in the chat too, if anybody, where's my chat? So if you add this to the end of a SharePoint URL, that's the OData feed. So if I come up here, this out of the way, and paste that in. So this is the OData for the SharePoint site. So if you take this link and you bring it into Power BI, I'm going to do new source OData feed. Paste this in. Organizational accounts again. And connect. So I mostly use this one for documents, like I mentioned, so I'm going to pull in this document library. So here's our files. So technically you can connect to SharePoint document libraries using the list connector because they're actually kind of the same thing on the back end, just with different columns and features. But it doesn't have the metadata for the files on it. If you use the list connector, you have to use OData to get the custom columns. So I added a custom column in the document library, so you can see that here. And then you also get the content types. You can filter out folders if you want to. That's kind of useful. Got the paths, you can filter on that. Created by, you can expand if you want to. Great, so that was OData. So let's embed our Power BI report. So I've got back here, open up our very beautiful Power BI report. Very impressive looking. So if we copy this link, the whole thing will work. So if I take this and then come back to the SharePoint site. So these pages, you can either create a new page or you can edit the existing one. We'll just make a new page. We've got all kinds of fancy templates nowadays. Wow, I haven't actually looked at these yet. These are hilarious. Is that okay? We're gonna go with this one because it's super impressive looking, right? Okay.
Some
See how
great
this
templates.
I haven't been in here to look at this since they launched it. Let's see how this looks. They just added these flexible layouts where you supposedly can like drag and rearrange things easier than you used to be able to. The problem with using the templates is that they usually come with like links and things preset. And so like these buttons, like you have to go and edit every single one of those buttons because they all link to things that like don't exist. So I'm gonna add a new section down here. So the web part that we want, if we hover on this little invisible space here, we get a pop-up. So we want the Power BI web part. If you don't see it at the top, you can just search for it. So in here, we can click on Add a Report and then just paste in a Power BI report. So it'll let you select which page you're embedding and the dimensions and or aspect ratio rather, and you can turn off the navigation if you want kind of a cleaner embed, the action bar. And then we can republish this. I need a page title to continue. Okay. There we go. So it's got all of the interactivity that you get with Power BI. So you'll have the hover tooltips and the cross filtering and that kind of thing. Not that I have anything to cross filter, but it's basically like a iframe into your Power BI report. The technique that I kind of like with this is to make a visualization. Like if you want to just embed one chart, you can just make your visual take up the entire page in Power BI and then just embed that page and it'll fit nicely. If you try and put a whole dashboard on a SharePoint page, it usually squishes it down and you can kind of hardly see things because it doesn't fit. So make things bigger than you expect. Great. So that is the end of my demo. Do we have any questions?
I have been asking and seeing any questions. Everybody's now a SharePoint Power BI Pro. Thanks to you, Christine.